Evan Hale felt the world tilt the moment his phone buzzed, its faint vibration slicing through the quiet kitchen as rain tapped against the windows in uneven bursts. And he knew before looking that something was wrong because Mara Hale had stopped humming mid-note, her hands trembling just slightly as she rinsed a glass she had already washed twice. He opened the message, saw a blurred frame of their hallway at midnight, and his chest tightened as a shape crossed the screen, familiar yet impossibly out of place, and the cold truth prickled along his spine like static. Mara said, "You're imagining things, Evan," her voice too soft, too steady, and he felt that old question rise like a bruise. What if betrayal was the only way to survive? He stepped closer, heart pounding, hearing his own breath echo against the tile as Lena Cross' name flickered under the thumbnail, and a tremor raced through him because she shouldn't have been anywhere near their home. The rain grew louder, the air heavier, and for a moment Evan wondered if the lie he feared was already behind him, waiting to be uncovered once the video played. Evan replayed the blurred frame in his mind as he stepped into the hallway. The air colder here, the shadows stretched thin like something waiting to be acknowledged. And Mara followed with footsteps too light to be casual. He whispered that he had heard noise last night, a faint click, like someone testing a door, but she dismissed it again with shaky calm, insisting he needed sleep. He felt the walls narrow around him as he traced the outline of the spot where the shape in the video had passed, wondering why his heart pounded harder the closer he stood to it, and why Mara paused far behind him as though afraid to join him. His voice wavered when he asked if she had been awake at midnight, and she hesitated just long enough for dread to slip under his skin. The storm intensified outside as Evan moved toward the living room, each step echoing with a dull thud that felt heavier than it should. And he kept replaying Mara's hesitation, trying to pretend it hadn't shaken him. She insisted nothing unusual happened last night, yet her eyes flicked toward the darkened corner where the video's figure had appeared, betraying an instinct she couldn't hide. He asked if Lena had contacted her recently, and Mara's sudden stillness felt like a silent confession. The room swelled with tension as the rain hammered the windows, and Evan sensed a truth lurking beneath her words, waiting for the moment he'd finally confront it. Evan sat on the couch, the cushions sinking beneath him as he tried to steady his breathing. And Mara stood by the doorway as though unsure whether to approach or retreat. He asked why Lena's name appeared under the file, and Mara stammered that she didn't know, but her trembling hands told a different story. He wanted to believe her, yet felt a growing ache, a sense that something vital was slipping beyond reach, pulling them into a darker place where trust no longer belonged. As the wind rattled the window frame, he wondered if the lie he feared had always been waiting for a moment like this to finally surface. Evan finally opened the video, the first frame freezing on the dim hallway with muffled audio humming underneath, and Mara inhaled sharply, as though bracing for impact. He asked softly why Lena would send something like this, and Mara shook her head, insisting again that he was misunderstanding everything. But uncertainty flickered in her eyes, like a candle fighting a draft. The image on screen shifted, revealing a faint silhouette moving through their home at midnight. And Evan felt his chest tighten as he recognized the shape, the way it carried itself, the subtle tilt of the head. Mara whispered his name, but the air between them had already fractured into something fragile and dangerous. Evan woke before dawn. The storm finally faded, yet leaving the house wrapped in a heavy quiet that pressed against his thoughts like a warning he couldn't shake, and he replayed the midnight silhouette again and again until the thought shapes blurred into something far more unsettling than shadows. Mara moved softly in the hallway, her steps hesitant, as if afraid the floorboards might reveal something she wasn't ready to confront. And Evan felt a chill when she avoided looking at his phone, even though the screen was dark. He asked if she wanted to talk about the video, but she murmured that the clip was distorted, and he was letting fear twist things into monsters that weren't real. Her voice wavered, though, betraying nerve she tried to hide beneath steady breaths. and he noticed how her fingers tapped an irregular pattern against her thigh. The same rhythm I'd heard in the recording. A thought gnawed at him. If she wasn't lying, then why did the truth feel close enough to taste yet impossible to grasp without breaking something between them? He stepped closer and she stepped back, the smallest movement but loud enough in meaning to make his pulse surge. Oh! Evan walked to the living room again, compelled by an uneasy pull toward the spot where the silhouette in the video had lingered, and he felt a strange static in the air, as though the memory had left a residue only he could sense. Mara followed a few steps behind, insisting gently that he needed rest, and that the stress from work had blurred his sense of reality. But her voice faltered when he asked why Lena's name was attached to the file at all. She claimed it must have been a glitch or an old contact sync, yet even she seemed unconvinced by the explanation, and her glance toward the window reminded him of someone surveying exits rather than scenery. Evan knelt to the floor, testing the creak of the boards, comparing them to the faint audio in the video, and the realization that the sounds matched made his throat tighten. He whispered that something happened here last night, something neither of them wanted to acknowledge, and when he looked back at Mara, her expression held a fleeting flash of fear. She quickly buried beneath a practiced calm. Evan checked the security system next, scrolling through menus with a growing sense of dread as he realized several timestamps were missing, clipped cleanly from the archive as though someone had known exactly what to remove. Mara lingered on the far side of the room, her arms crossed not in anger, but in a strange protective stance, and she looked away when he asked if she had accessed the system recently. She shook her head. But the denial came too fast, too rehearsed, making the silence afterward feel sharper than any admission. Evan felt something shift inside him, a dawning understanding that the video wasn't the beginning of a mystery, but a fragment of something larger he had ignored for too long. He whispered that Lena would never send him something without a reason, and Mara's subtle flinch nearly made him drop the device. The room felt smaller as he scrolled through corrupted files, each one a missing piece that pushed him closer to a truth he feared would break the fragile balance between them. Evan stepped outside into the fresh scent of rain-soaked pavement, hoping the cold air would clear the fog in his mind. But instead he noticed footprints along the concrete path near the side door. Prints slightly smeared as though someone had rushed through the storm during the night. Newer. Mara joined him reluctantly, wrapping her arms around herself, and insisted those marks were from yesterday when she took out the trash. Yet Evan could tell the pattern was too recent. The water still pooled lightly inside each indentation. Indentation. His pulse quickened as he crouched beside them, tracing the shape with his eyes, and he realized they matched Lena's small stride from the countless times she had visited before everything fell apart. When he asked why Lena would come here without calling, Mara's silence dropped over them like a curtain, the kind that tries to hide something rather than soften it. The cold wind rattled the fence, but the real chill came from the growing suspicion that Mara wasn't the only one rewriting last night. Inside again, Evan felt the house tighten around them like a secret, refusing to stay buried, and Mara's forced calm only deepened the divide that had formed overnight. He told her plainly that the footprints, the missing timestamps, and the shadow in the video couldn't all be accidents, and she begged him to stop chasing ghosts before he pushed them past a point they couldn't return from. Her voice cracked when she said it, revealing a fear that wasn't aimed at him, but at something unspoken lingering behind her eyes. Evan felt a tremor rise in his chest as he asked if Lena had contacted her recently, and Mara's lips parted in a silent, involuntary response before she shook her head with too much urgency. The air grew still as he wondered whether the truth he sought was something that would destroy them, or free him from a lie he never realized he was living. Evan sat at the dining table long after the house had settled into an uneasy hush, the silence broken only by the faint ticking of the wall clock that seemed to grow louder with every passing second, and he replayed the missing security timestamps in his mind like pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit. Mara stood by the doorway, pretending to tidy a stack of unopened mail. but her eyes drifted toward him with a mix of worry and something he couldn't fully name. Something caught between fear and resignation. He asked again if she had talked to Lena recently, and though she insisted she hadn't, her voice carried the subtle tremor of a truth she couldn't quite swallow. He noticed how she avoided looking at the laptop, where he had grouped the corrupted files, and the realization that she feared what he might uncover made his pulse throb in his neck. A knot formed in his chest as he wondered whether the woman he trusted was protecting him or protecting herself. Or worse, protecting someone else entirely. The thought twisted deeper when he asked if she recognized the silhouette in the video, and she shut her eyes for a fraction of a second, too long, as though bracing for impact. Evan opened a hidden folder on the laptop that he previously ignored, and inside, he found a series of thumbnails all marked with identical timestamps from months earlier. Footage he never remembered saving. Each file showed fragments of conversations near the same hallway where the midnight silhouette had appeared. And as he clicked through them, he noticed Mara stepping into frame again and again with expressions that shifted between frustration and secrecy. Mara hurried to his side, insisting those clips were accidental autosaves from a home inventory app they tested months ago, but her explanation fell apart when he pointed out that Lena appeared in 2 of the frames, entering the frame's house with a quiet familiarity that struck him like a blow. Mara whispered that Lena had visited to return borrowed items. Nothing more. Yet Evan felt a cold certainty settle through him as he realized the angle of the footage implied someone else had been holding the camera. He asked who recorded it, and Mara's silence delivered its own answer. Evan moved to the hallway where the earlier footage had been recorded, the quiet around him carrying a strange familiarity from the way the camera had framed this exact stretch of shadow and light, and he felt a pulse of unease as he imagined someone standing right where he stood now, recording them without their knowledge. Mara followed at a careful distance, her steps slower than usual, as if the memories buried in this space might resurface if she walked too close. Evan traced the edges of the doorframe, comparing it to the video's angle, realizing the person had been tall enough to hold the camera steady above eye level. And the thought that Lena had once been this close without him knowing pushed something sharp against his ribs. He asked Mara again who had been here with her, and she insisted no one had. But her voice softened in a way that made denial sound like an apology. The hallway felt colder suddenly, as if the past itself was pressing in, reminding him that the truth was no longer a distant threat, but a presence lingering just beyond reach. Evan stepped into the small storage room beside the hallway, drawn by a faint smell of dust and something metallic that made his throat tighten. And he flicked on the light to reveal stacked boxes he hadn't opened in years. Mara stood in the doorway, pleading softly for him to drop this search before it consumed both of them. But he ignored her as he pulled down a box labeled with a date he didn't recognize. Inside, he found an old recording device wrapped in fabric, its battery drained, but its memory card still intact. And he felt a tremor ripple through him when he realized the device matched the angle and motion of the hallway footage. Mara's face turned pale as he held it up, and she whispered that she had meant to throw it away. But the crack in her voice carried a truth she had been hiding. Evan felt something inside him splinter as he wondered how long this device had been watching them, and more importantly, who else had held it besides her. Evan inserted the memory card into his laptop despite Mara's trembling plea for him to stop, and the screen filled with a folder of hidden clips marked with dates spanning nearly a year. Each one captured inside their home from different angles that made his skin crawl. No. He sure scotched crawl. He opened the earliest file, and there was Lena standing in their kitchen late at night, looking over her shoulder, as if listening for someone upstairs, and the sight forced the air from his lungs. Mara covered her mouth, whispering that it wasn't what it looked like, but the fear in her eyes revealed she knew exactly what the footage meant. Evan felt a cold wave wash through him as clip after clip showed moments he had never witnessed. Conversations between the two women, hurried gestures, whispered exchanges too faint to decipher. His heartbeat thundered as he scrolled to the final file, time-stamped only hours before the night in question, and the realization that he was seconds away from the truth made his hands tremble uncontrollably. Evan stared at the final video file for several seconds before pressing play, the faint click echoing through the room like a trigger he couldn't reverse, and the footage opened on a grainy image of the hallway bathed in moonlight, haze that made the air around him thicken with dread. Mara hovered behind him, whispering that he didn't need to watch it, but he ignored her as a figure drifted into frame. Lena moving with careful, deliberate steps, glancing around as though accustomed to the rhythm of this house in the dark. Misterio. His stomach tightened when she paused at the foot of the stairs and whispered something he couldn't make out, yet the tone carried a strange familiarity that made him feel betrayed by the house itself. Mara's breath hitched as the camera tilted slightly, capturing an unseen hand holding the device, and Evan felt his pulse crash when he realized the angle aligned perfectly with Mara's height. He asked her, voice raw and low, why she had filmed that night, and her silence pressed against him like a confession carved into stone. The clip ended abruptly, leaving the room swallowed by a tension that tasted like bitter truth, and he felt the terrible certainty that everything he thought he knew had already been dismantled piece by piece. Evan followed Mara into the bedroom, the two of them moving in slow, uneven steps, as though trapped in the aftermath of a storm that hadn't fully passed, and he demanded to know why Lena was in their home at night without his knowledge. Mara insisted that Lena had come to talk during a difficult period, saying she had tried to protect him from things that would only deepen old wounds, but her words frayed around the edges with guilt that begged to be heard. Evan clenched his fists as he asked who had recorded the hallway footage if not her, and she hesitated long enough for a cold answer to bloom in his mind. The air thickened between them when she finally admitted she hadn't held the camera, but had known about the recordings, and chosen silence instead of truth. Evan felt something inside him snap at the quiet break in her voice, a realization that the betrayal he feared was deeper than one night's secret. His chest tightened as he wondered what else had been hidden, and Mara stepped back with trembling hands as though bracing for a storm she could no longer control. Evan opened the closet where he remembered placing old belongings from before the rift with Lena began, and inside he found a box labeled with dates spanning nearly 2 years, each marked in Lena's handwriting, a discovery that felt like a sudden fracture beneath his ribs. "You were sure," Mara whispered that she had tried to get rid of the box many times, but never had the courage. And Evan felt his breath catch as he realized the box had been sitting only a few feet from their bed all this time. He opened the lid to find small objects wrapped in cloth, each one tied to a moment he thought he had shared privately. A receipt from a restaurant he visited alone, a scrap of paper with his handwriting, even a broken key he had thrown away years ago. He asked Mara how Lena had obtained these things, and the silence that followed was heavier than any answer. His pulse thundered as he wondered how far Lena had gone to stay close, and whether Mara had helped her or merely failed to stop her. The room felt smaller as he held the items, each one a reminder that the truth had been living in shadows far longer than he realized. Evan stepped into the hallway again, driven by a need to retrace every secret path the videos had exposed, and he paused beneath the ceiling vent where a faint draft hummed with a low, unsettling tone that prickled at the base of his spine. Ken, Paul Dershay. Mara followed reluctantly, pleading for him to stop searching before he uncovered something that would break them beyond repair. But he ignored her warning as he dragged over a chair and climbed up to inspect the vent's interior. The darkness inside felt weighted, like it had been holding its breath for months, and when he reached in, his fingers brushed against a small metal object that sent a cold shudder through him. He pulled out a hidden camera, no bigger than a lighter, its lens pointed downward, as though it had been watching them from the heart of their own home. Mara gasped and pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering that she had never known it was there. But her disbelief wavered under the weight of too many unspoken truths. Evan's chest tightened as he wondered how many more eyes had been watching them, and how long Lena had been slipping inside unseen. Evening crept across the house with a heavy quiet as Evan sat on the floor, surrounded by the hidden camera, the recording device, and the box of objects, each one forming a map of betrayal he couldn't ignore. And Mara knelt across from him with eyes full of words she couldn't speak. He asked if she had ever told Lena about their fights or the nights he worked late, and Mara whispered that she had confided in her once, believing it harmless but hadn't realized how deeply Lena clung to every detail. Evan felt a cold ache settle into him as he asked why she hadn't warned him about Lena's persistence, and Mara admitted she feared he would blame her for letting things go too far. His breath tightened as he realized the truth he faced now wasn't just about surveillance or secrets, but about the quiet choices that had let everything spiral until the night Lena appeared in the dark. He stared at the objects around him, wondering what the next video would reveal, and whether he was prepared for the answer waiting in the shadows. Evan sat alone at the dining table long after the daylight had thinned into a cold gray dusk, the scattered devices around him forming a jagged circle of truth he could no longer outrun. And he inhaled shakily as he inserted the final memory card into the laptop. Mara lingered a few steps away, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched, begging him one last time to wait until morning. But he couldn't silence the feeling that the night itself was holding its breath. The screen flickered before, loading a folder of time-stamped clips, each one filmed closer and closer to their bedroom door, as though capturing the slow approach of something inevitable. Evan felt his throat constrict when he noticed the pattern. Every clip was recorded on nights when Mara claimed to be asleep, and each one showed Lena pacing through their home with an intimacy that made his skin prickle. Mara whispered that she never meant for things to spiral, yet the tremor in her voice carried old guilt, the kind that couldn't be softened with apologies. Evan pressed play on the first file, bracing himself for whatever waited beyond the darkness. The footage opened on grainy night vision, the hallway stretching out like a tunnel carved from faint green light. And Evan leaned forward as Lena emerged from the shadows with a deliberate calm that chilled him to the core. She moved with quiet certainty, pausing occasionally as if listening for someone upstairs, and every gesture carried a strange familiarity that made the hairs on his arms rise. Mara whispered that Lena had come only to talk, but Evan saw more in the footage. The way Lena traced a finger along the wall, the soft smile she wore as she approached the staircase, the expression of someone who felt at home. His breath caught when the camera shifted, revealing subtle movement behind the lens, a purposeful adjustment, a steadying of the hand, as though someone had followed her through the dark. He asked Mara again who had filmed it, and she insisted she didn't know, but her voice cracked under the weight of a truth she could no longer hold steady. Evan felt dread sink deeper as the clip ended with a faint whisper he couldn't decipher. Evan opened the next clip, and the image revealed Lena stepping into their bedroom while he slept on the far side of the bed, his breathing slow and deep as the camera recorded every movement with unsettling calm. Mara gasped softly behind him, her hand flying to her mouth as Lena approached the bedside table and placed something small upon it, an object he couldn't identify through the distortion. His pulse thundered as he realized the camera's angle came from the doorway where Mara often stood when she couldn't sleep, and the notion that someone had occupied that space while he lay unaware made fear rise like static in his bones. Mara insisted she had never let Lena near their room at night, but her eyes held a storm of contradictions she couldn't explain. Evan felt sick as he watched Lena lean closer toward the sleeping version of himself, her expression unreadable, her silhouette carrying the weight of secrets he hadn't been prepared to face. The clip cut abruptly leaving him shaken and breathless. The final clip loaded slowly, the progress bar crawling as though resisting the truth it carried, and Evan felt a cold sweat forming along his spine as the image sharpened into focus. The camera pointed toward the entryway where Lena and Mara stood together in the dark, their faces half concealed by shadow. Lena spoke in a hushed tone, her expression urgent, and Mara nodded with a tension that suggested more than fear, something closer to conflicted loyalty. Evan inhaled sharply as the audio crackled, revealing fragments of their whispered exchange, words like, "You promised," and "He can't know," and his heartbeat hammered so loudly it drowned out the rest. Mara stepped closer to him now, begging him to stop the video, but the clip continued, showing Lena placing her hand over Mara's in a gesture that sent a jolt through his chest. The recording ended with both women turning toward the camera, as if realizing too late they had been caught. Evan stared at the frozen frame, feeling the ground shift beneath everything he believed. Evan closed the laptop slowly, the weight of the final frame pressing against his chest like an immovable stone, and he felt the room tilt, as if every breath he took came through fractured glass. Mara knelt beside him, her voice thin with desperation as she begged him to understand that Lena had manipulated her, pushing her into choices she never intended to keep. But Evan couldn't reconcile the images with the woman he thought he knew. Misterio. He asked why she hadn't told him the truth when the first strange signs appeared, and Mara whispered that she feared losing him more than facing the danger Lena posed. A confession that broke something fragile inside them both. Evan's pulse trembled as he gathered the devices scattered around him, realizing the next step wasn't decoding the past, but confronting the living threat still hovering at the edges of their reality. The room felt colder now, as though the house itself braced for what came next, and Evan finally asked the question that hung between them like a blade. What else had she kept from him? Night pressed against the windows like something alive, and Evan felt its weight settle into the house as he paced the living room, replaying every whispered phrase from the final clip until the words carved themselves tighter into his mind. Mara sat on the couch with her hands shaking against her knees, insisting she had ended everything with Lena months ago, but the fear in her voice hinted at a truth more complicated than the clean break she described. Evan asked why Lena had returned, why she had been wandering their home at night, and Mara's silence filled the room, with a growing dread that felt like the slow tightening of a wire around his chest. He stared at her, searching for the woman he had once trusted without question, yet finding only shadows of doubt that deepened with every breath. She whispered that Lena had become unstable, obsessed even, and claimed she had tried to shield him from the worst of it, but Evan couldn't shake the sense that he had been living in the aftermath of choices he never knew she made. The house creaked softly, as though listening, and he wondered whether the truth waiting for him was darker than anything the videos had shown. Evan grabbed his jacket and stepped outside for air, needing distance before the tension inside suffocated him, and the cold night wrapped around him like a warning etched into every gust of wind. Mara followed him to the doorway, pleading for him to stay, but he shook his head as he walked across the damp grass toward the backyard fence where the footprints had first appeared. He traced the faint marks still lingering on the concrete, now softened by time but unmistakable in their pattern, and he felt a chill crawl up his spine as he imagined Lena standing here watching their windows long before she entered the house. Mara whispered that Lena had promised to leave them alone, but Evan heard the tremor in her voice, and knew promises had never been part of the truth. The cold air cut deeper as he realized he had ignored the signs for months, chalking them up to stress, fatigue, anything but betrayal. He sensed movement behind him, only to find Mara standing with her arms folded tightly, fear etched into every line of her face. Inside again, Evan turned toward the hallway where the hidden camera had been discovered, his gaze drawn to the vent like a doorway into a secret he hadn't yet opened fully, and the memory of Lena's midnight movements replayed with chilling clarity. Mara approached carefully, telling him she had tried to remove the cameras, but didn't know how many there were, and the admission struck him like a blow. revealing how deeply Lena had embedded herself into their lives. Evan's pulse pounded as he imagined unseen eyes watching them for months, cataloging their arguments, their silences, even their moments of peace. And he wondered how much of their life had become a performance for someone lurking in the dark. He asked Mara why she hadn't told him sooner, but her voice broke as she confessed she feared he would think she had invited Lena's obsession rather than tried to stop it. The confession seeped into him like a slow poison, leaving him uncertain whether she had been a victim of circumstance or an unwilling accomplice in a betrayal that still trembled in the shadows. Evan moved toward the kitchen where the first distorted message had appeared, the memory of the vibrating phone returning with a weight that pressed against his ribs, and he felt a shiver crawl across his back as he stepped onto the cold tile. Mara followed him cautiously, her breath unsteady as she told him Lena had once threatened to reveal things Evan didn't know about their marriage, though she swore the threats were empty. The kitchen felt smaller now, the storm from the previous night replaced by an eerie stillness that made every whisper sound amplified. Evan asked what secrets Lena was holding over her, and Mara hesitated before admitting that Lena had claimed to have recordings of their private conversations, arguments they had thought no one could hear. The revelation hollowed something inside him, leaving a space where fear and disbelief collided in jagged silence. He stared at the cabinets, imagining tiny devices hidden in the frame, and wondered how long their lives had been reduced to data, collected by someone he once considered harmless. Evan finally confronted Mara in the living room, his voice low but carved with the weight of everything he had discovered, and he asked her to tell him the full truth. Every detail she had buried beneath silence, fear, and misguided loyalty. "Oh, my name's Key." She collapsed onto the edge of the couch, shaking as she confessed that Lena had become possessive months before the break, demanding access to their home under the guise of helping with repairs and emotional support. Mara admitted she had allowed small boundaries to slip, thinking it was temporary, but Lena twisted every kindness into justification for deeper intrusion. Evan felt his heartbeat stutter as Mara revealed that Lena had threatened to expose private moments he had shared in confidence, using them as leverage to remain close. The confession sliced through him, leaving him suspended between anger and heartbreak, unsure where guilt ended and betrayal began. Mara leaned forward, pleading for him to believe she had tried to fix it before it spiraled, but Evan couldn't shake the question pulsing at the back of his mind. How much of their life had Lena seen, and how much had Mara allowed? Evan stood in the hallway where every secret had unraveled, the air heavy with the weight of choices that could no longer be undone. And he felt a slow tremor ripple through him as he realized the truth was no longer hiding in shadows but staring directly back at him. Mara approached him timidly, her breath shallow, pleading for a chance to rewrite what had slipped beyond her control. But Evan's mind kept circling the same haunting question. Would you forgive someone if the truth was worse than the lie? He thought of the nights Lena had wandered their home, the recordings hidden in their walls, the whispered promises captured on video, and he felt his heartbeat stumble as he wondered how much of his life had been shaped by someone else's agenda. Mara whispered that Lena had gone too far, that she had tried to break free long before it spiraled, yet Evan could hear the unspoken confession trembling beneath her words. The hallway seemed tighter now, its silence thick with the echo of everything they hadn't said. He exhaled slowly, bracing himself for the moment that would define what little future they might still salvage. Evan moved into the living room with deliberate steps, feeling each one settle like a decision made in slow motion. And he asked Mara what Lena truly wanted from them. From him, from the fragments of their marriage she had silently collected for months. And Dory Malks. Mara admitted Lena had once believed Evan would eventually choose her, that the videos were pieces of proof she used to convince herself he already had, and the confession felt like a cold blade sliding beneath the truth he thought he knew. Evan clenched his jaw as he asked why she hadn't stopped Lena sooner, but Mara's voice cracked as she explained how fear blurred into confusion until she could no longer tell what danger looked like. He swallowed hard, realizing their lives had been drifting toward this confrontation long before the first distorted message appeared, and the knowledge made his pulse throb with a mixture of anger and sorrow. The air between them felt stretched thin, a fragile thread that might snap with the slightest shift. Evan returned to the laptop, feeling the finality of the moment settle over him as he opened the earliest recording once more, this time searching not for answers, but for the truth lying beneath every small gesture he had overlooked. Overlooked. Mara knelt beside him, whispering that she wished she had told him sooner, that she had been terrified of losing him long before Lena became a threat. Evan studied her face, reflected in the screen's glow, seeing not malice but a woman unraveling under fear and misguided hope. Yet the hurt remained, deep and unsteady, like a fracture running through everything they had built. He asked quietly whether Lena still had access to their home, and Mara shook her head quickly, insisting she had changed the locks and blocked every path she could find. The admission steadied him only slightly, leaving him torn between fear of the past and uncertainty about the next step. He exhaled shakily, realizing forgiveness was no longer a simple choice, but a crossroads neither of them had wished to reach. Evan stepped toward the front door, drawn by an uneasy instinct that tightened in his chest as he imagined Lena standing just beyond the threshold, waiting in the dark for the perfect moment to reappear. Mara followed, fear tightening her breath as she whispered that Lena had vanished weeks ago, that she had cut ties and left without a trace after their final argument. But Evan couldn't shake the lingering sense that something unfinished still hovered at the edges of their lives, the kind of silence that felt less like closure and more like a pause before the next echo. He rested his hand on the doorknob, feeling the cool metal pulse with the memory of everything that had been undone in this house, and he wondered whether opening it would reveal a final truth or another layer of fear. Mara touched his shoulder softly, begging him not to look for answers outside when the real reckoning waited within these walls. Her touch trembled with regret and longing, and he felt himself pulled between two truths, one rooted in betrayal, the other in a fragile hope still struggling to breathe. Evan returned to the living room slowly, feeling the heaviness of each step as if deciding his future with every movement, and he faced Mara with a quiet resolve that hadn't been present before. She watched him with wide, fearful eyes, bracing for the verdict she believed she deserved, but he spoke softly, telling her he wasn't ready to forgive, not yet. But he was willing to stop running from the truth. Mara exhaled a broken breath, relief and sorrow, entangled in a way that made their next moment feel painfully human. Evan said they would need to rebuild from nothing, with honesty instead of secrets, and that he needed space to understand how deeply the damage reached. Mara nodded, tears gathering but not falling, as though afraid any movement might shatter the fragile peace settling between them. The house grew quiet, holding the weight of everything they had survived, and Evan wondered whether the next chapter would begin with healing or with the echo of the question still lingering in his mind. What if betrayal was the only way to survive?